This is the Sharing Without Shame podcast, where we go beyond addiction to uncover the deeper roots of trauma and shame. Hurt people. They hide behind masks. And here, we're done hiding. We're sharing our stories without shame.
Hello, and welcome to the Sharing Without Shame podcast. I'm your host, Donna Marston. I'm an author, certified recovery support worker, family recovery facilitator, and most importantly, a mom who's walked the painful path of loving a child in active addiction. This podcast is a safe space for parents and family navigating the chaos, confusion, and heartbreak that addiction brings into the home. Here you'll hear real talk, not sugar-coated advice. You will use practical tools and proven strategies that will help you set boundaries, shift your mindset, and start showing up for your own life again. You're not alone, and you don't have to keep living in survival mode. And if you're ready for the next step, you can grab my free guide, 5 Boundaries and Breakthroughs, in the show notes. And when you feel it's the right time, reach out to me. We can do a free discovery call, and I can help you move forward in whatever you're dealing with. So today I'm excited to welcome Lauren Sisler. She's an ESPN sports broadcaster, motivational speaker, and author of Shatterproof. Lauren's work is focused on breaking the stigma around addiction and mental health, especially in communities of athletes, the military, and faith groups. So welcome, Laura.
Hi, good to see you, Donna. How's it going?
Good. Very good. So, first question I would like to ask you is, what would you like to share without shame?
Sharing without shame, man. It depends on when you ask me that question. If you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even been able to identify shame as part of my journey, but now I'm realizing that I spent a lot of time in hiding because of shame. And so
Mm.
just being able to open up and share my personal story, my personal journey. And it goes back to when I was a freshman at Rutgers on scholarship and lost both my parents to prescription drug overdoses within 5 hours of each other. Heartbreaking tragedy, and really something that happened behind closed doors, something that we as a family had no idea about. And, I've had to unpack that over the years, and I'm here now continuing to unpack that and to feel the gift that it is to not carry that weight that I once carried because of the shame of how my parents died in March of 2003.
Wow, I'm so sorry to hear about that. Wow. So you're in college. What are you, 18?
18, yep.
Do you have other siblings?
Yeah, older brother Alan. He's no longer with us. Unfortunately, we lost him in November to some health issues. So it has been a long journey just trying to manage that. My brother was my rock, and we walked through this journey together of losing both of our parents. He was in the military when it happened. I was at Rutgers. And so, it's been a long winding journey, and just being in the midst of the grief and the shame and the pain and all the things. I know it's something that everybody experiences on different levels and obviously in their stories and what they walk through. And so, I think conversations like this are so important, and the work that you're doing, Donna, and your experiences and bringing this into light is just it's amazing work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I work with typically parents who have a teen or adult child in active addiction, but it sounds like you knew nothing about what was going on in the home, that you didn't
You
know
know,
your parents.
I did not know anything about the prescription drug addiction. I will say this, my dad was an alcoholic, and it's something that we were aware of, but 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old me had no idea what that was, didn't know what
We did.
alcoholism was. I was so detached from it. I was focused on gymnastics and life and all the things. And so wasn't in my mind a critical issue. And my dad was functioning and he worked through it. And there were a lot of, good times, and then there were some bad times. But for the most part, I was very unaware of any sort of addiction and misuse of their prescription drug medication. I knew they were both going to a pain management doctor, getting help for the chronic pain they were experiencing, but I had no idea that they had gotten to a point of misusing and abusing it, and ultimately, taking too much that ended their lives.
And it's so common that because of prescription medications.
Mhm.
It's not always from street drugs.
Yep.
And so that profiling is typically somebody who's addicted is, somebody who's homeless or, grew up on the wrong side of the tracks or whatever. And you just never know. But with prescription drugs, and I kind of had to do the same thing. I find, I won't say who the family member was because in case they're listening, but I had a family member that, other than my son, that I had to help detox because the prescription meds, wasn't like, needed to, was misusing, but it was just became addicted to it. Because over time, many people, it changes the brain chemistry,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? How did you deal with your grief? Let's talk about that. Because here you are, an 18-year-old, going grieving two parents at once. Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like carrying a massive weight through all of that, and I think that in life, you expect loss is going to happen at some point, but you never expect that you won't have one there to support you with the other. And I think that was really challenging for me. Is like, I find out in the matter of just a few short hours, one parent's gone, now the other's gone, and trying to navigate that. And I think a lot of it was, shock in the early days of it all, but then going back to Rutgers, trying to continue working on, my career, my degree, all the things that I was working towards, obviously being a collegiate gymnast. It was kind of like just in a lot of ways I was like forced to compartmentalize things and just like keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And, I think that in some ways I was really good at it, but in other ways, it forced me into a place of denial, forced me into a place of shame, right? Because of what happened to my parents, not being able to acknowledge that they died of overdoses. It took me years to get to the place where I could say my parents died of overdose because I just could not accept the fact that they had become addicted to their medications and that they were misusing those. Because at that point, I felt like, that now becomes a choice. That's a character flaw that again, labeling. We want to label people and label their circumstances. And for me, I was just like, that can't be my parents. So I'm not going to call it that. I can't call it that. It is what it is. And I can't change what took their lives. But I've rewired my way of thinking and recognizing that, addiction affects so many people in so many different ways. And while, we can't always protect ourselves from that, we have to lean into this idea of hope and recovery, and that life, it requires work. It just requires a lot of work. And when we can remove those labels and remove that stigma, we can start on our journey to healing, which I think is such a gift.
Yeah, and the thing is, we don't know we need healing until we know we need healing.
Yeah, right. Absolutely, no
And
doubt about it.
yeah,
Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and it's easy to get in that fog and that mindset of like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, it's not happening to me, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, like I'm in the thick of this thing, and yes, it is absolutely happening to me.
yeah. Well, it shows up in different ways. And, because denial, in my opinion, when my son was in active addiction, was a beautiful thing.
Oh
I
yeah. Oh
lived in
yeah.
la la land, not my child. It was just
Uh-huh.
an easier thing. I didn't raise him to do drugs or, you know, have that lifestyle. That's not what he was taught. So, I absolutely get the denial. And I
Mhm.
certainly understand the stigma, because I was one to profile people, and the first time I had to go to my son's, it was his first IOP, intensive outpatient program, and thinking I got to go sit with those people,
Mhm.
right?
Yep. Yep. Because your situation's never as bad. It's always kind of looking at it, and it's so hard to look at the reflection of it all and realize that like the journey and how the individual got there might look different. The end result is the same, and the ultimate call to action is to get help and to get to a place of recovery. And so I think that that is sometimes hard for us to acknowledge because it's always not me, not me, not my problem, not going to happen to me. And then it does. And it's like, okay, this is real. And so,
Mhm.
I think we can speak to that in so many different areas of our life. But, addiction specifically impacts so many people, but it's not something that's heavily talked about like many other topics and things. So that's why we're here having this conversation today.
Right. Yeah. And for, for me, I had to hit my enough. And I always say, when our kids hit their enough or our loved ones hit their enough, they'll seek help, they'll get treatment. And the same applies to the family members. How did you know? At what point did you know that you needed to mind shift or find a way to heal that little girl who lost her parents? I think a lot of it goes back to inner child work. And even though you put everything's in a compartment, it's still showing up
Mhm,
one way
mhm.
or the other. It's coming out one way or the other, that you're not allowing yourself to do something, or you're protecting your heart so it doesn't get hurt again. How did that, can you talk about how that all showed up for you?
Yeah, I think that it took a long time for it to kind of boil over. And again, I think I went into protection mode. I built up these walls, these brick walls to protect myself, protect my family, protect the legacy, right? And so I,
Hmm.
I think denial became my protection. That became my armor to deny, to deny. And then, look at it, it's not as bad as it seems. And then really just kind of manifest what it was that took my parents' lives, because for so many years, for 7 years, even my best friend didn't know how my parents died. And so it was this narrative I created, telling people, well, mom died of respiratory failure, dad died of a heart attack, because that was the easiest way to spin it. And to me, there was a much, it was like an innocence, right? Like those two things feel so much more innocent than like addiction. But what I've come to realize over time, and I think this gets cracked open on this journey, is like how addiction affects people. And really, addiction, while people want to point the finger and say, well, it's a choice, it's a choice, it's a choice. Well, it can be a choice until it's not. And I think that's the one thing we have to rewire our way of thinking, and understanding that, like anything else, we often talk about cancer and different illnesses and diseases. And, we often say, well, it's not a choice. Sometimes our decisions do lead down a path of illness, and it is our choice that led us to fall into some sort of illness. So you can't necessarily categorize all of those as such. But with that being said, nobody chooses to wake up and be an addict. Nobody says, well, hey, I'm going to grow up to be an addict one day. And I think that's where the human body, human mind, and the human spirit, can take over. And while we don't willfully want to be that thing, something else is attacking, the enemy is attacking and bringing us down that road. And I think for me, my breaking point was just, I got so exhausted and so tired of running, like just running from the truth, running from the reality, running from what the actual aftermath of all this was. And I have to give credit to my auntie Linda, my mom's sister. She really kind of helped me to break those walls down, helped me to see that my parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives. And it was slowly breaking those walls down, because there were moments where I just wanted to punch her. Like, I can't believe that you're attacking mom and dad. That's not what happened. And she just kind of had to like step back and wait to like lovingly welcome my realization that, like, no, this is what it is. And it doesn't change who your parents were when they were with us. And it doesn't change who they are and the legacy that they carry now that they're not with us. And it just took a long time for me to get to that place of being able to talk about it. But that breaking point came years and years after my parents died. And so when I finally broke those walls down and started to slowly allow myself to acknowledge the truth, I feel like this freedom came in the wake of all that. This freedom that became such a gift that I felt I was able to set myself free. And it really has shown up in a lot of areas of my life, that freedom that has come from standing in the truth and owning it.
Well, we're as sick as our secrets, and you had a big secret,
Yep.
and it's gonna crack open one way or the other, in a good way or a not so good way.
Yep.
And it's really, it's just hard, because it hurts. Our hearts, there's really a broken heart syndrome, and your
Mhm.
heart's broken. And so you're working past all of that, trying to mend that piece of you, and then keep your life together.
Yeah.
And kudos to you. I mean, you're so young going through this, and I can tell you, I was going through it in my late 50s, I think, and I was a mess. I couldn't function. I couldn't have done what you were doing. I went to bed when nobody was looking because my heart was so broken I couldn't function. And I found an emotional scale, and I was number 22. And so to look at how life is for us and how to get out of that pain or how to deal with our emotions, I had to learn to elevate myself up and then keep myself between like 1 and 7, because if you get to 8, it's boredom, and you start to vibrate down into anger and guilt and shame and all of that stuff. So it affects our bodies. It affects our energy fields.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. I think that there's no one moment where it was like the ha moment. It was just that track that I was taking that eventually, like you said, my body and my mind and everything along with it just started to get exhausted and just
Yeah.
run out of steam. And it was like, okay, no more. And then slowly you crack open that thing. And I know you mentioned sometimes it can be good or bad. And I am grateful that it has turned into such a blessing in so many ways, right? Because I do feel like I've found a message and a calling and a purpose in my voice through all of this experience that I've had to endure. It's not easy. It's not easy because I talk about it and it's never lost on me. I mean, this is the third podcast I'm recording today, and I can feel the weight of it. Like I'm feeling the weight of all of this right now, even 22 years later. So, I have to remind myself like the reality of like this is not someone else's story. Like I lived it and I'm having to relive it every single day, whether I'm talking about it or not. We're living in that grief. And that can be such a challenge. And then I'll say this, and I think that this is really important to acknowledge because I've brought this up a lot recently, Donna, and I think you can really speak to this as well. Grief is an interesting thing because I think a lot of times people associate grief with loss, loss of life. Let's say in this case, with my parents, they're no longer living, but
Yep.
grief can be very, very, very heavy, even in the wake of a life, right? In what you had to endure with your son and going through that can be so challenging because here's the thing, like we tend to grieve what's lost, but you can also grieve the person that's right there in front of you that no longer is a shell of themselves. Is You're
Yep.
grieving the life you wish you had, grieving the
Yep.
life you wish they had. You're
Yep.
grieving day in and day out. They might be sitting right next to you, and yet you're grieving them because of
Yep.
what they're walking through and the pain that has created for everybody. And that's exhausting. It's
Yeah. And,
exhausting.
we're grieving our hopes and dreams for what their future could be, that could be lost. And is this going to be forever, or is this just a phase he's going through? Or yeah, grief is real. And I remember, I used to be an advocate. I still advocate for the state, but when I was much more involved, and I did my first protest. I've never done a protest in my life. And I was like in my 50s and we're lying down in front of the State House for them to pay attention. Like the people who are sick and suffering, they're not bad people. They're like all of us.
Yeah.
It affects any family. Doesn't matter what your financial status is, your family status, none of it. And so it just kind of like shakes you up. But they put a bunch of flags out for all the people who had passed, that had overdosed. And I said, but what about our kids who are still walking on this earth? We're grieving for the loss of our beautiful children that are still alive.
Yeah. And I think that is something that we oftentimes don't acknowledge enough in illnesses, and of course, it's across the board with different illnesses that we are faced with. But yeah, grieving life, grieving the hopes, like you said, the dreams, the goals, the aspirations, everything you wanted for your relationship with that person. Those things can certainly be rebuilt. Uh over time and Lord willing and when recovery is found and people are able to walk into the light, it still becomes a constant battle. And you still have to walk through that. I mean, there is fear's always going to be there. It's just always going to be there. And I even know as like a mom now of a 2-year-old, like fear creeps up on me often, right? Like I know I'm going to be having those conversations at some point. I know that we're going to be talking about his grandparents, my mom and dad, what they struggled with, what they walked through, and then also the fears of what is his life going to look like? What road is he going to walk down? And while you'd
Hmm.
love to protect your children from everything, you just can't. And so,
Yep.
I think that's just as parents how we're called, in this life, and it does take its toll. And so I think it's so important to bring that to people's attention, to understand and see that, like, hey, you're valid in grieving this very thing that is still living and breathing. And even if if restored your relationship with that person, and that person has entered into recovery and is thriving, like, there is still grief and fear and all those things that are still attached to it, because you've walked through this thing, and you just hope and pray that they stay the course. But
Hmm.
there's still always that doubt, that fear, that things
Hmm.
could go in a different direction. And I'm sure that it keeps people up at night. It kept me up at night, and
Yes.
I've been through it, and I understand it. And um, it never disappears. And I think that's one thing I would want to say to people. I think there's always hope. And if you're walking in the midst of it right now, there's certainly hope, and brighter days are coming, and you will get to the other side of this thing. But I also want to encourage those that feel the weight of grief in any form, that is also valid. And you can experience the joys of life, but also the fears, sadness, all at one
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And, that's part of living and breathing.
Yeah. And the fear is really, it's control. When we're fearful, we try to control the situations,
Yes.
and so my fear, I tried to control my son's addiction. Didn't work out real well.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
yeah, and all it did was make me crazy. You
Yeah.
think you're the crazy one. And here's what I learned is that my son's self-medicating his pain.
Uh-huh.
I'm feeling mine because I was never one to drink or do drugs, but yeah, I mean, not that I'm innocent Lily or anything like that. I didn't self-medicate when I was going through this. I felt my pain.
Mhm.
I felt the hurt in my heart,
Mhm.
and I didn't know that I was part of the problem, and I had to learn to become part of the solution as a parent
Mhm. Mhm.
because I was his unhealthy helper, which many people say, well, you're codependent and you're an enabler, you're this and you're that. I that's People blame and shame us for loving our loved ones, and I don't think that's cool. So
Mhm.
the parents I work with, let's talk about the unhealthy helping we provide. And what that was for me was I was paying off drug dealers. You know, I was rescuing him all the time.
Mhm.
And so and sometimes we have to go through that so until we hit our enough. And when we hit
Mhm.
our enough, just like when our loved ones are in active addiction, I hate the word rock bottom because that can mean death. When our loved ones hit their enough and they want help, they'll seek us out. They know how to get there. They
Mhm.
know where the
Yeah,
resources.
I love that too. That phrasing, that terminology there, enough, because you're right. I mean, I think that it's rock bottom is used in so many circles. I've used it time and time and time again, and I think that um you know that speaks volumes, because again, I think that as long as there's breath in our lungs, there is hope. And I think that
Right.
that is, everyone's breaking point is different. Everybody's aha moment is different. And not everybody reaches that in the way that we hope they will. But I think that idea of enough, it's different for everybody. And I think that it makes it challenging too, because I think that we're always seeking answers, right? And the blueprint for how to do this thing.
Yeah.
And it's just different for everybody. And your success story is going to be different than mine, and different from that person next to me. And, while it'd be so nice to say, well, you know, Donna's son was going through this, and this is how things got, how things got turned around. That's not everybody's story. And I think that, you hear time and time and time again, like, oh, for me, it was a 30-day treatment, and I've been sober for 20 years. And then you have people that are like, oh, I've relapsed 100 times and I still relapse, every year. It's different for everybody. And I think that's the other point that is worth making is that we have to be cognizant of that and know there is no single way to get there, but that also is the reason that hope should still live, because if it didn't work for you, it doesn't mean it's not going to work for me, and vice versa.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And as long as a person keeps trying, like, don't beat them up over it. Love them, right? Just be loving and kind and supportive, because they keep trying. They're trying to make a difference, and they're trying to have a different lifestyle as long as they're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
So one question I want to ask you, um, how does addiction affect like the sports community or the military?
Yeah. Well, I think it affects them greatly. I would say the sports community is big because you're talking about, you know, you're dealing with a certain group of people that have a certain mindset, an elite kind of mindset, competitive spirit, in which too, has we all have our flaws, right? But athletes tend to fall into addictive behaviors oftentimes because it's do everything you can at all costs to get back out there to compete, right? And so then you're seeing a lot of people that endure these injuries, these things that obviously, create setbacks. And then it's like, well, I'm getting paid an exorbitant amount of money. And if I don't get back out on the field, I'm not going to get paid. I'm going to lose my scholarship. I'm going to lose my contract, whatever it is. And so then it's just like literally doing everything at all costs without necessarily recognizing the outcome could be detrimental and potentially serve as the springboard for an addiction in life. So you see that with athletes, and I think in the military a lot of the same. My dad was in the military, brother was in the military. I watched it firsthand, just the mindset that it creates, right? You this soldier mentality, but what that means, you don't break, you don't bend, you don't talk, you almost hide behind this suit of armor, this military suit of armor. And I think in a lot of ways that then becomes, the identity that, a veteran or even an athlete carries. And so then they are literally living life behind this shield, this identity, this mask, and it makes it even harder for them to, come out of that and share and to be open and to be authentic and to ask for help, because there's something about this breaking point and this idea of like, well, I can't acknowledge that. That can't be me, right? Because, if it is, like, I lose my identity, I lose my everything, I lose my self-worth. And I think that can happen in all areas of life, no matter what career field you're in or sector. But I really do see it so much in the veteran community and in the sports community because identity is so tied to that very thing.
Mm, wow. I know. And there's so many homeless veterans, because of drug addiction and
Hmm.
or else mental health, a lot of mental health issues. So I want to shift gears and let's talk about your book,
Yeah.
Shatterproof.
Yeah. Right there. Where is it at?
Over
Over here
there.
on this side. I'm like, which side? Ah. Yes, my book Shatterproof. Yeah, it's been such a journey. It is a memoir. It really digs into the depths of my story and my parents' story and what led them down that road. I'll tell you, for years people are like, "Oh, you need to write a book. You need to write a book." And I'm like, "Write a book? Like, I'm not an author. Like, I don't know how to write a book." But eventually finally kind of took the leap of faith and partnered with some great people to kind of help me get it out in the into the world. And it's been amazing. Like, gosh, it's been amazing. I think for me, if anything else, it's provided so much healing because I had so many questions and a lot of things had not been answered. And this sent me on a major journey of uncovering, unraveling the things that had led us down this path in the first place. And so for me, it has just been an amazing experience. And I'm grateful for it. It stirred up a lot of emotions, most certainly. But to be able to give someone this book and to say, hey, like, I want to meet you where you're at. Like, this is my story. I want you to welcome me now into your story, and I want to meet you where you're at and the life that you're living and what has created so much pain and, what has guided you to where you're at today. And so that's always that's the hope and goal, is that people are able to take something positive from it and apply it in their lives, and to make a difference, and maybe that perspective shift that I received, which I believe to be a gift, can also be a gift for them as well.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Now, you're also a motivational speaker.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
Yeah, so I do a lot of speaking. I obviously as a sports reporter, I'm a professional communicator. I don't know how professional I am, but we'll see. But I have really taken that message. Obviously, it's a condensed version of the book. So, typically I'll speak and then people will grab the book to kind of answer some of the questions they have because 45 minutes just isn't really long enough to like dig into it all. But really it's just the key messaging of helping people to walk through shame, to walk through different things in their lives and to help them fall in love with their stories. That is my ultimate message and my mantra in life: fall in love with your story. So how
Mm,
can we learn to fall in love with our story? And really that is first having courage to step into the truth, to be in the truth, to own the truth, and then to find that freedom that comes with using our stories, finding purpose in that, recognizing that we're not defined by it but refined by our stories and the struggle that we face, and getting it out of the darkness and bringing it into the light. And to me, that is what the goal is and what I hope. And, that's really my keynote message as well with the speaking. And, it's been really cool because obviously as a sports reporter, I tell stories for a living and, that is a career, but I've so much purpose in this other work that I'm doing and this outreach that I'm doing and spending time in different organizations and corporate settings, I mean, all over the place with different companies and organizations to help plant those seeds and help people to move past some of their greatest setbacks, which shame tends to be at the forefront of that.
hmm So how would people get in touch with you and how do they buy your book? Or where do they buy your book?
Well, I'm all over social media, of course, at Lauren Sisler, and then my website at laurensisler.com. I've got, you can reach out there. I've got a form on there. You reach out, I will get the email. It comes direct to me. So I'd love to hear your story. If you've, you heard my story, heard this podcast, would love to hear from you. Always love feedback. And then of course my book, you can get it on my website. There's all the links there to the different places you can buy it. It's available in hardcover. We're releasing the paperback at the end of September, which is awesome. And then also the audio version is available, which I narrated myself. So you will get the full story straight from the horse's mouth right to your headphones. So very appreciative of that as well. So it's been a long journey and I keep reminding myself it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So, just keep going one day at a time and just hopefully keep touching lives and making a difference.
Yeah, and sometimes in this world, it's a breath at a time,
Yep,
right?
it absolutely is. Yep.
Yeah. Last but not least, any words of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, well, I said it before, fall in love with your story. And I think that's where you really take ownership of the things you've walked through, maybe the circumstances, challenges you face, maybe the mistakes that you've made, taking full ownership and saying, hey, this is part of my story. I am going to own the good and the highlight reel, but I'm also going to step into the hard and the tough and the struggle and say, this is all part of it. Because to me, that is what legacy is all about. That is what our stories are all about. It's not just the highlight reel, right? It's the tough and the hard and the struggle. And I think that when we can start to acknowledge that, we will find the gift of freedom. And I say you'll start to unlock those shackles of shame and you'll be able
Mm,
to walk in a journey and in a confidence that allows you to recognize that you too can be shatterproof. It doesn't mean you don't fall. It doesn't mean that you're not going to face challenges, but it certainly means that you have the ability, that resilience allows you to get back up and piece together that life that once was all pretty and beautiful that's now shattered into a million pieces and put it back together and build something that has joy and has purpose and will help you to rebuild something new.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yay.
taking the time to come on. I really appreciate everything you shared today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donna. And thank you for what you do and for sharing your story because it means a lot and it creates a ripple effect. And so that's why we're here having these conversations.
That's it. You got it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining Donna for today's conversation. Remember, trauma may wear many faces, but healing is about uncovering the truth beneath the pain and learning to live without shame. If today's episode resonated with you, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps this message reach more hearts that need it. If you have a story of navigating trauma, shame, or addiction and how you found your freedom, Donna would love to hear from you. This podcast is built on real stories, and yours could inspire someone else's healing. Visit sharingwithoutshame.com to connect with Donna, apply to be a guest, or learn how to bring her books, coaching, and speaking engagements to your community or organization. Until next time, remember, healing begins the moment you choose to stop hiding and start sharing without shame.